Here's what I want to do this morning. I want to preach from the subject, a more perfect union. A more perfect union. What a great time to talk about this on Dr. King's birthday anniversary as we celebrate as our anniversary as a church. Because I want to talk about a couple of things. I want to talk about lenses this morning. I want to talk about lists. I want to talk about loyalty. But then ultimately I want us to land on something called love. Let me read this to you, because many of us, if you grew up in school, you know this. This is what's called the preamble to the Constitution. You remember this. It says, "We the people of the United States, in order to form," watch this, "a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Then we know that the Constitution goes on to say that we hold this truth to be self-evident, and it talks about being equal. And let's be honest, come on, I'm just going to keep it real this morning. Let's bowl down the lane. We know for a fact that when that was written, there were certain groups of people that did not apply to. And while we hold to that ideal, let's be honest, the pressure's on, because when it was written, they weren't thinking about enslaved Africans. They weren't thinking about women. They weren't thinking about the disabled. There were entire groups of people who were left out of this, and yet we still have these beautiful words that are penned to say that we started this thing because the ideal and the desire was to create a more perfect union. We got a long way to go, but there's still an ideal that there is something that can be done, that there's work that needs to be done in order for us to establish a more perfect union, which suggests that we are far from it. We know, let's be honest, that there's a lot to be desired in the mindset. As a matter of fact, let's be honest, even the framers of this framework live with a particular set of lenses. They live with a particular set of lenses that said that certain people were less than, that African Americans and enslaved Africans were 3/5 of a person. Come on, let's be honest. You read this, you know this history. They live with a particular set of lenses. And I think that if we're not careful, we don't understand that the lenses that we have on have a profound way of shaping how we view life, how we view faith, and how we view one another. And so while we believe in the words that were penned, there's some problematic things about the words that were penned, which leads me to the reason why we have problem with politics. Yes, I'm going there this morning. I'm going there because there's a particular set of lenses that we all live with that informs how we see the world, and it's problematic. Even though those words were penned to create a more perfect union, it put a lot of pressure. Because when it comes to the problem with politics, I'm getting to the text, just hang with me. There's oftentimes a language of loyalty that's spoken. Come on, you know what I'm talking about. In order to form a more perfect union means that I've got to find the perfect person to put my support behind. There's this language of loyalty, and I get it. Most of us, if we're to be honest, there are a few on the fringes who are just absolutely out there, and I don't know, I pray for them, but can I be honest, most of us, we want to live out this loyalty, and especially if we're Christians, we want to live it out and demonstrate our loyalty to Jesus. I believe that. I believe that most of us, now don't get me wrong, there are some of us that I know who have no good intentions. There are those people who are out there who are on the fringes, who really live with the lenses that they have on, who really believe that there are people who are less than them. There are really people who still believe that blacks are less than whites. There are still people who really believe that people with disabilities are less than people who are able-bodied. There are really people who still believe that women are less than men. There are still people, but I think those people are on the fringes. I think most of us are just trying to demonstrate our undying loyalty to this promise and to our principles of Christianity. Most of us, we want to live out this undying loyalty. So the question is, how do we demonstrate our undying and unquestioned loyalty to Jesus? Because it seems to me most of the problem that we have had during this election season is there are those people who really believe that by saying what they say and doing what they do, they are demonstrating their undying and unquestioned loyalty to Jesus. But I'm going to fix that this morning because Jesus tells us exactly how to do it. There's a story of a woman. Maybe you heard this story before. I probably said it in a sermon before, but if you heard it, just laugh like it's the first time you heard it. There are people watching who never heard this story before. Act like you never heard it. There's a story of this woman who she fell ill and she's about to die. The doctors told her that she didn't have much time to live, and so she went to God and prayed. And she said, God, please, there's more things I want to do with my life. I promise you that if you give me more time, I'll be perfect. I'll do everything that you asked me to do. And so somehow God granted her prayer. He said, okay, I'm going to give you 15 more years to live. Well, the woman now is excited because she has more time to live and she wants to express her undying loyalty to God for giving her the breath in her lungs. And so she decided, I want to be perfect. I want to do everything perfect. And it got to the extent to where she decided that I even want to look perfect. And so she said, you know what? I always had a problem with my nose, never really liked it. So I'm going to get plastic surgery because I want to be perfect. Everything I do from now on, I want to be perfect. So she got surgery on her nose. She said, you know, I always had a problem with my ears. I didn't really like them as a child. People made fun of me. And because my goal is to be perfect, she went in and got her ears fixed. And she went on to have over 10 surgeries in her pursuit to perfection. And on her last surgery, she leaves the hospital, walking across the street, gets ran over by an ambulance, dies, and goes straight to heaven. And of course, she's upset because she hadn't got to the end of her 15-year extension. So the first thing she does is run to God and says, God, you promised me 15 years, and I promised you that I was going to be perfect. I did all this stuff. I changed how I look so that I can be perfect and live out the rest of my days perfectly. And God looked at her and says, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. Y'all will catch it on Tuesday. Some at home, they didn't catch it. At home, look, just type in the comments, there's people who didn't catch that. Can I say this? In our pursuit of a more perfect union and perfectly demonstrating our undying and unquestioned loyalty to Jesus, I am afraid, watch this, that the church is becoming something that is unrecognizable. And it's killing us. In our pursuit to form a more perfect union and to have loyalty not just to our country but also to our Christ, there's a lot of things that are getting mixed up and we're getting confused, and the church is becoming something that God doesn't recognize. And it's killing us because we're often looking for the perfect politician. Come on now, we're looking for the perfect policy. We're looking for the perfect party. We're looking for the perfect plan. Come on now, how many of you feel like I do? The more messed up my life is, the more perfect the person representing me needs to be. Because my life is messed up, I need you to be better than me. I need you to, come on now, let's be honest, that's how we feel. A lot of what's driving our decisions because the more jacked up my situation is, the more perfect a policy needs to be, the more perfect the politician needs to be, the more perfect my party needs to be, the more perfect the plan needs to be. And our idea of perfection is linked to the right language, to the right look, to all the stuff that we need somebody to represent us, and there's a lot of pressure. The problem is we tend to reserve love for those who we think deserve our love. Yeah, we love people who look the part. It doesn't matter which side you're on. If they look the part for what you want them to represent, if they say the right things and they have the right statistics, and we categorically deny love to anyone or anything that ventures outside of our ideas of perfection. And in our pursuit of a more perfect union, trying to perfectly display our loyalty to country and perfectly display our loyalty to Christ, we're getting confused, and we've created a church that God don't even recognize. See, there's pressure in perfection. You know this. I mean, 2020 was a year where we were under a lot of pressure. Yeah, whenever you have a global pandemic that is literally killing millions of people across the world, didn't you feel the pressure? Like, I had to wash my hands and be very careful where I went and careful who I hung out with. And these are people that I love that I can't even see, I can't hug, I can't touch. And there was a lot of pressure to live perfectly because the only way to abstain from getting the virus that might kill you is to try your best to be perfect. That's a lot of pressure, isn't it? Every time I go somewhere, I got to make sure I wash my hands, sanitize. Come on now, in the beginning, weren't we washing down our groceries, leaving our mail out on the front lawn so it could air out? Come on now, you know what I'm talking about. Every move that you made in 2020 was strategic. It was almost like COVID was saying, if you're not perfect, it could kill you. And ain't that pressure? That's some kind of mess, isn't it? There's a lot of pressure. Come on now, you know about pressure. Can I just say this and be absolutely transparent? For my white brothers and sisters, being a black person in America is a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure for us to try to navigate spaces where we knew that the framers of this Constitution had lenses that didn't see us as equal people. And let's be honest, there's still some residue of that mindset that's in our plans and our policies and our parties. And it's a lot of pressure to try to make sure that we live a certain way. Come on now, you know this. When something happens, the first thing they do is dig up your history. And the pressure is on for us to teach our children how to be perfect, because God forbid you make a mistake. Every little thing that you've ever done in your life will be drugged through the news. If you make a mistake, there's pressure. But then from my white brothers and sisters who I love, you got pressure too. Because many of us, remember I said there's some people on the fringes, but you don't come to a church like this if you believe those things. But you got pressure too. Because of decisions that you didn't make. You now live in a country where the pressure is on, where you want to be an ally, but you're not quite sure what to say. Am I going to be considered racist? The pressure is on. I want to say the right thing, but I don't always know what to say, and it's a very sensitive. Come on, am I being real here? And that's a lot of pressure. I feel you. It's pressure. I mean, being in a church like this in the days that we're facing is a lot of pressure. Because there are groups who would love nothing more than to see us divided. There are people on the outside of our community, and sometimes on the inside of the Christian community, who would love nothing more than to see us hating one another. And to do the kind of church that was set out 8 years ago, to live that dream that Martin Luther King had, that we wouldn't be segregated on Sundays, in days like this where it's divisive, that's a lot of pressure. Because let's be honest, we don't all think the same, we don't all live the same, we don't all vote the same, and being together, even in the midst of our differences, is pressure. There's a lot of pressure on us. The moment the words of the preamble and the Constitution were penned, the pressure started. There's pressure to abandon, watch this, the contradictions in our country that fail to live up to those words. That's pressure. I said in the beginning, we have work to do because we believe in the words that were penned, but we have a lot of pressure to make those things come true. It's pressure. I hate to tell you this, but Jesus doesn't make it any easier to handle the pressure. I wish I could tell you that all those things that are very real pressures in life, that once you became a Christian, Jesus alleviates you from living under the pressure of living out what we say we believe as Christians. Jesus does not only not relieve us of the pressure, but Jesus, watch this, adds more pressure. I don't know if I like that. But Jesus doesn't call us to find perfection in our politics or our policies or even the preamble. He insists perfection from his people. What are you talking about, Pastor? Nobody's perfect. Well, let me tell you what Jesus said. Matthew chapter 5, verse 48. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Yeah, he's saying that to a group of people. You remember the Sermon on the Mount? We preached a sermon about the Beatitudes, which is the beginning of that sermon, but he goes on to preach a lot of things. And in this section, he's preaching about loving people who are different from you and loving even your enemies, those who oppose your views. And he says, here's what I want from you. You. Did you catch that? Emphatically. You, not them. Okay, some of y'all just missed that because the problem with politics is we put our loyalty and the pressure on everybody else to come up with the perfect policy, to come up with the perfect plan, to have the perfect platform that gets rid of the mess of my life. But Jesus stands up to those who follow him. He says, don't put that on them. You be perfect. He's talking to his people. Yeah, because the problem with politics is we put too much pressure on people who sometimes don't represent what we say we believe, as if Jesus called them to do our job. And he says, no. In the section where he's talking about loving people who are drastically different from you, even to the extent that those people can be considered enemies, he never says that it's their job to get it right. He says, you be perfect. Wait a minute, Jesus, that's a setup. Right? Come on now, because I am far from perfect and so are you. I mean, come on now, we know the Christian trump card that we use when we do something that we shouldn't. You know what I'm talking about. God knows my heart. You know what I'm talking about. You use that too. And you only say that when you do something that you know you shouldn't have done, or said something that you shouldn't have said, or typed something that you shouldn't have typed, and then you say, God knows my heart. Here's the problem. He does. He says, you be perfect. Just as he gives us a litmus test. As your Father in heaven is perfect. I got news for you, church. We have put far too much pressure on people representing us in offices when the job has never been theirs to be perfect and demonstrate perfect love. The job, Jesus says, is on the church. We have bought into a system that says if you just pick the perfect candidate and the perfect platform and the perfect party, and if they say all the right stuff and they represent your side of the issue and they fix your mess that you got yourself into, then all of a sudden the world will be perfect. But Jesus says, I'm not asking them to do your job. You be perfect. Jesus, I can't be perfect, man. I'm not perfect. Come on now. You know, we all say that I'm not perfect. I'm not starting from the pulpit to the pew. None of us are perfect, but Jesus gives us a glimpse into his definition of what perfection means. You ready? He says, be perfect even as a Father in heaven is perfect. Here's what he says, Matthew chapter 5. I'm going to read verses 43 through 48 so you can get a good sense, because he doesn't just leave us there. He lets us know what he wants. So I'm going to back up to verse 43. He says, you have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, okay, that's good right there. He says, the law says, yeah, the policies say, the politicians say, the culture says it's okay to hate folks who are different from you. The law says it's okay for some unjust acts to happen as long as it was technically legal. But I say, love your enemies. You notice that Jesus didn't let us off the hook on technicalities. He didn't let us off the hook. He didn't let us off the hook by saying you can push that on somebody else to do your job and you can live your life living on technicalities as long as it is technically right. It's okay. He says, no, the law says, but I say. Here's my question. When did what Jesus say stop mattering to us? Yeah, he says, the law says, but I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Wait. Because we're starting 21 days of prayer today. And our day one is to pray for new passion and commitment and corporate spiritual renewal. And Jesus has the audacity to say, in your prayer time, don't just pray for you and your family and your stuff. Pray for people who are not like you. And I dare say, pray for the people who don't even like you. What? You mean to tell me, Jesus, you want me to take all my precious devotional time and all these powerful prayers I'm praying in the morning, you want me to take time out of that to pray for people who don't like me? Yeah, do that. Check out what he says. He says, in that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. For he gives sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? In other words, if you're only nice, if you're only kind, if you're only loving to people who look like you, act like you, vote like you, that don't impress me. He says, love everybody. Check out what he says. Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you're only kind to your friends, how are you different from anyone else? Even pagans, non-believers are nice to people who are nice to them. But you are to be perfect, as your Father in heaven is perfect. Did you catch what happened? Jesus says, here's how you demonstrate your undying loyalty to me. Because I get it. You're under a tremendous amount of pressure. You want to be allied, but you don't know what to say. You're living in a country who the framers, the lens were that you were less than nothing. And there's still people who believe that, and there's still the residue of that in some of the policies that are in our laws in this country. And he says, and I know you're under a lot of pressure because you want to have undying loyalty and commitment to your country, but also you want to have undying loyalty and commitment to Christ, and you're doing your best under the pressure to demonstrate your loyalty to me. Here's the problem. He only gives one way to do it. He did not say that it's by how you vote. Okay, some of y'all missed it. Let me read it again. He says, but I say love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. He says, that's the way. I know you're under pressure, but you don't, watch this, you don't get to decide how you demonstrate your loyalty to Christ. It is not for who you vote for. It is not for the perfect plan, the perfect politician, the perfect party, the perfect platform. It is not voting for the person who you think can get you out of your mess. It's not voting for people who sometimes even stand against your Christian values. He says, you want to demonstrate your undying loyalty to me. Pray for those who persecute you. Love everyone. It's in that way that you show you're true children of the Father. In other words, you don't get to decide how you demonstrate that you're loyal to Jesus. He is very clear that if you want to demonstrate your undying loyalty to me, here's the way to do it. He says it's in that way that you demonstrate your undying loyalty. See, the context of perfection that Jesus is speaking about is love. Did you catch what he said? He said, let me read it again because maybe some of you didn't catch it because you're asking, how can I be perfect? Listen to what he says. He says, it's in that way that you'll be acting as true children of the Father in heaven. Watch this. Here's his definition of perfection. For he, God, gives his sunlight to both evil and the good. And he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. In other words, everybody gets the same treatment from God. Did you catch what he says? Even evil people. People who don't like God and want nothing to do with God still receive God's love. He says, you want to be perfect? Here it goes. He says that God's love is not reserved for those who like him or reserved for people who are anything like him. Have you ever noticed that the people who like Jesus the most were the most unlike Jesus? No, seriously, read your Bible. He hung out with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes. He hung out with all the folks who society didn't want to hang out with. The people who liked Jesus the most were the most unlike Jesus. You know why? Because even though they were unlike him, here's the word, tweet this, Jesus wasn't a jerk, and neither should be his followers. Yeah, tweet that one. Tweet that one, because there's many of us, come on, let's be honest, in the name of religion and in the name of what we say we believe, let's be honest, many of us have been acting like jerks. And it's no wonder why people who don't follow Christ want nothing to do with the church. Why? Because they don't recognize the church that we created, and neither does God. He says the people who are evil still get God. In other words, let me just say it this way. And notice that he states that the law is not how we demonstrate our loyalty to him. We demonstrate our loyalty to him by leveraging love. So if I could say it in a way that you can remember, he says that the good and the evil get reign, and the just, everybody gets equal treatment. God showers his love on those, even though they are so different from him. They don't even want anything to do with him. And in other words, Jesus is saying that God has no list. So let me say it in a way that you can remember. Because you're wondering, how can I be perfect? Here it is. Perfection exists when your love has no list. Yeah, because if I ask you right now to name all the people that you love, you can give me a list, and the problem is that there is one. The problem is that there are qualifiers for those who you think deserve your love. And what we have found is that as things got to become intense and divisive, the more you found out about how people thought different from you, looked different from you, voted different from you, the more you curated your list of who you found worthy to love. Jesus says, no, there's only one way. I get it. You're under pressure. There's a lot of pressure. And you're under pressure to try to be loyal to your country and to Christ. But let me tell you, here's how you do it. Forget what the culture is telling you. Here's how you do it. Love everyone. In other words, if you're not doing that, you're falling grossly short of demonstrating your loyalty to Christ. And I said this before, I don't believe that you got up on a Sunday morning and came to church because you want to do worse. I don't believe you're watching at home because you want to be worse. Most of us, remember, there's some people on the fringes. I am aware that there are some people who really believe that others are less than them. But for most of us, even those who are part of this church, I believe that you don't believe that. So if you don't believe that, Jesus says, here's how you demonstrate your loyalty to me. You want to be down for me? You want the world to know that you're down for me? Don't do it in the polls. Do it in the way you treat people. No matter who you voted for, it doesn't give you a right to be a jerk to someone in person or online. Because he's saying that's not how you demonstrate your loyalty to me. I know you think you're demonstrating that you're loyal and you're down for me, but there's only one way. He says love people and pray for people who are different from you, who have different opinions. Love everyone. You want a more perfect union? You be perfect. Not them. It's not their job. He didn't give the keys to the kingdom to the government. Remember when he told Peter, he says, and I give you the keys to the kingdom. He gave it to the church. And somewhere along the way, we've created an organization that does not resemble the church that Jesus started in the pages of these scriptures, and God no longer recognizes the stuff we've been doing. He says, you want to demonstrate your loyalty? Perfection exists when love has no list. Do you know this, that there are roughly 2.4 billion Christians in the world? That's only about 30%. And not even half of that 2.4 billion Christians are even Americans. Do we honestly believe? I told you I'm going to say some stuff that's going to mess with you. But out of the 30% of people in the world who claim the same faith we claim, not even half of those live in our country. So let me ask you a question. Do you honestly believe that God doesn't love people that's not on your list? Can I tell you why that's dangerous? Because a belief built on the notion that God's agenda is not bigger than our nation is Christian nationalism. And it is dangerous, it is destructive, and it is disrespectful to the commitment we claim to have to Christ, to the cross, and to the gospel. The world is bigger than what's happening of the borders of our country. Yes, what's happening is important, but the problem is when you think God is only concerned about what happens in this nation, you end up practicing a church and a religion that God doesn't recognize. Because there are billions of people in the world who still don't know Christ, and we're fighting over perfect policies and perfect plans and perfect platforms, all while we disrespect each other and show each other no love. And Jesus says, you're not showing loyalty to me by doing that. If you want to show loyalty to me, if you want other people to know that you're really down for me, if you want your church to resemble the words that he said when he started this ecclesia, he says, love everyone. It's not optional. And you don't get to decide that I'm down with Jesus because of how I voted. Nowhere in the text does he say that's how you decided. See, the practice of perfect love begins with understanding how we practice our freedom. Because here's the thing, most of us, we live in a free country. We love our freedoms. Can I ask you a question? Are you willing to die on that mountain knowing that in the pursuit of practicing your personal freedom, you have been disrespectful not only to people but to God? Listen to what 1 Peter says. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 15 and 16, this is what is called the household code. He says, it is God's will that your honorable lives should silence those ignorant people who make foolish accusations against you. Watch this. For you are free, yet you are God's slaves. Listen to this, because I hear this all the time. Freedom of speech. I can say whatever I want. Can I just tell you, freedom of speech protects you from the government getting you. It doesn't protect you from the consequences of saying ugly and hurtful things to people. So don't think you can say whatever you want and you will pay no consequences for your ugly speech. Peter says, yes, you are free. He's talking to Christians who are now free in Christ because they realize that when we're free in Christ, we no longer have to be subjugated to the rules that Rome says that we are less than who they are. In other words, when people found Christ, they found freedom because they understood that the culture said you're less than. And he said, no, now that you're in Christ, you're free. You don't have to have the mindset that you're less than somebody else because Jesus died for everyone. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. Anyone who would die for everyone means that no one is a nobody. And Peter says, you are free, yet you are God's slaves. Watch this. Here's my word to you. This is a word to the church, not just this church, but to the church, those who are listening. So don't use your freedom as an excuse to do evil. Can I just tell you, there's been a lot of ugly stuff that has been said. A lot of it has been people that I personally know. And we've seen it. And the rallying cry is always, well, that group said, or this group did, or how come I can't express my opinion? Express your opinion. But Peter says that your freedom is never an excuse to do evil. Can I caution you to understand that when perfection exists, when love has no lists, then we leverage love in the way that we talk. And here's the first thing that I'm going to challenge you with. Leverage your love in your language to people who are different from you. Because I got to tell you, some of the stuff that I have seen online, I'm going to bowl down your lane, is far from demonstrating loyalty to Christ. And we are creating a religion and a church that God himself does not even recognize. I get it. You're under a lot of pressure. You want to demonstrate your loyalty to country and to Christ. But Jesus says, here's your priority. You want people to know that you're down for me? Watch how you talk to people. Don't use your freedom of speech as an excuse to do evil. Got to leverage love. I'm going to end with these two verses. John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35. And now I give you a new commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Did you notice that he doesn't even give you an option on the degree of love? Did you catch that? Not only does he say love one another, but he says, here's how. As I have loved you. You want to know what the measurement for love is? It's sacrificial. You know what that means? Sometimes I got to sacrifice my mouth for the sake of unity. You know what I'm talking about. Jesus on the cross in the old song says he never said a mumbling word. He could have said whatever he wanted to, call down a legion of angels, but for you to have life, he stayed silent. Sometimes, can I just be honest with you? We need to learn the discipline of restraint. Everything that pops in your head don't need to come out on your keyboard. He says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. If you love one another, watch this, then everyone will know you are my disciples. And too many of us have been trying to prove our discipleship by who we voted for. And we wear it like a badge of honor, as though if my political choice somehow demonstrates my loyalty to Jesus. Jesus says that is far from the truth. The only way you can prove that you're my follower is to love folks